Hey everyone, welcome to Rewriting the Narrative. I can't remember if we typically do that as our intro or not, but happy Friday, Mare. How are you?
Happy Friday. I am good. We are actually dealing with forest fire smoke again this year. So it's little gnarly out. I was like, "Hey, we were
Ooh.
walking and I was like, "Hey, it's kind of like what is with this fog?" And then by yesterday afternoon, it was like actually smelled like things were burning. It was kind of and
I
everything
was
like
just gonna ask if you could smell it. Yeah.
yeah, and everything. It was funny like the moon was like had this red hue, but then also the sun did too. It was like it was really weird.
Oh, that's trippy. Okay,
Yeah.
so this will come out after, but I was going to tell you privately, but I'll just say it publicly. Next Wednesday, I think it's the 11th, June 11th, is a strawberry moon.
Oh,
So apparently it's going to have like a reddish pink tint. I don't know. I don't know. I think we had a pink moon. I don't know. Anyway, I meant to tell you that it's next Wednesday. So yours might be slightly tainted by forest fires.
yeah. We'll have to off air. You'll have to tell me what the pink moon means because I remember the blood moon. She was feisty.
Yeah, I'll have to. Strawberry Moon sounds like kind of nice, but we'll see.
Yeah, Sarah and I are into this stuff. In case anybody doesn't like, I literally feel that moon energy whenever things are coming. So I'm interested to see about what
I
the
mean,
strawberry
it's also because I do like. I mean, I know you can always look for correlations and whatnot between some of this stuff, but people call it woo or whatever. But I mean, ancient practices and like beliefs have been a thing and stood the test of time for a reason. And one of those things that I always talk about when it comes to thyroid specifically, that we're going to be chatting about today, is the connection between the throat chakra
Ooh.
and thyroid physiology and thyroid health. And the throat chakra is very much about speaking your truth. And I just find that, I mean, one of the main contributors to hypothyroidism, or we could even say like any imbalance in the body, is chronic stress, right? Which encompasses so many freaking things. But suppressing your voice, not speaking your truth, playing small, all of that, that's a chronic stress if you ask me. And because I've been there and you've been there, like that holding yourself back, it's like those like little things that people forget about as like a stressor that yeah, maybe that's not like the thing, but it's definitely a drop in the bucket. And then depending on how big of a drop of it is in your bucket, it could make a significant impact to give that throat chakra some love and TLC.
Oh my gosh, emotional and psychological stress, absolutely. And I think that it's interesting, like not to get too much on like throat chakra stuff, but I think that truly aligns with regards to like the thyroid health because if you're having like what is those unresolved traumas and
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're living it day to day, whether it's in your work environment or in your home environment, in your personal relationships, communication is huge. And something that I've been saying a lot to my clients is I think that communication is an art, it's a skill, and I don't think that we practice it well enough. And I think that for lack of a better description, I think we've lost the ability to communicate well, especially with emojis and things like that that are just like quick. And so that can really shine through in relationships and communication is losing the ability to communicate how you feel or even receive how somebody else feels because they might not be able to communicate well and suppressing that voice for fear of not ruffling any feathers or feel like you're walking on eggshells or feel like every time you say something it always comes out wrong like just that goes far into that psychological and that emotional stress. So I
Absolutely.
totally see the connection.
I would say we normally like end the podcast with something like deep and like philosophical, but we're going to start with it today. So I'm here for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But speaking of thyroid and stuff, okay, if you're listening to this, our webinar is next week on perimenopause, and we're going to be talking like toolkit for coaches things you need to know as a coach, actionable, things that, we can be working on with clients or paying attention to. And hypothyroidism, is a big thing when we work with clients of any age. But, in our female clients specifically, hypothyroidism, even subclinically, is very, very common. Yeah. And I'm going to say one of the contributors is these like kind of fitness born habits, such as chronic under eating, restricting, over exercising, again, all of that stress. And then, we can say, poor gut health, et cetera, contest preps, medications, like we could go on and on. But in the women that we work with, especially, by the time they're in that perimenopause, age, we might be seeing signs of hypothyroidism, and it might be impacting their results, as far as performance, physique, but then so many other systems, as well as how they're feeling and functioning in their day to day, and may explain a lot, because that little butterfly shaped gland, he, I don't know, is involved in every process in the body.
Yeah, I think that right now, like especially for a female that's, so midlife, we're just gonna, oh my gosh, I think in a previous podcast I actually said we shouldn't like lump people into groups, but I'm gonna lump some groups here. So we're gonna say perimenopause midlife is, we're going to say late 30s to 50s, right? Women who are this age group, their thyroid health, like you mentioned, it can be at very different places. And I think that for a lot of women, the majority of women, and this includes people that are in the fitness space, perhaps the bodybuilding space, but those who are not, I truthfully think that at this time, as with most things, they're not even aware of their thyroid health, where it was or even is. And it's not typically until, for example, our physique is not showing up how we want to, how, someone's like, oh, well, I'm starting to gain weight, or typically those types of symptoms, or perhaps chronic fatigue, inability, insomnia. We start to hear a lot of symptoms. And I'm going to say, like, that's severe when by the time you're like, hey, I'm chronically fatigued, or I have, I'm losing my hair, my skin is dry. That's the time when most people start investigating. And this is where, Sarah and I are really adamant when we work with females, like she said, like any age, we do like to get a pulse on, looking at under the hood and looking at that thyroid health prior to being symptomatic at all. But getting to the point of perimenopause, this is where we do encourage our females to get some lab work done, just to take an assessment of where they are right now. I think that a lot of people will not look at thyroid health specifically for midlife, or even like, postpartum women, and they will really truly focus. I hate to say focus on sex hormones, because I don't even think they do that, but they won't look at a full encompassing thyroid picture. They'll look at just a TSH, which I'm just gonna, because I've been rambling for a while, maybe you can tell the folks why just running a TSH to just assess thyroid health overall is not even close to a big picture.
Yeah, a lot of times, you'll have a client that says like, oh yeah, I've had my thyroid tested, and that was it, was that TSH, and maybe it was like a year ago. But TSH is going to be your thyroid stimulating hormone. However, TSH is a hormone from the brain. So it's not a reflection of the thyroid gland itself. So that's why, like, we do want to see a full thyroid panel, which for us includes your total and free thyroid hormones, T4 and T3, as well as we want to see thyroid antibodies, because we want to see if there's anything autoimmune going on, reverse T3 as well. We want to see, and we also want to see that alongside your other basic labs. So your comprehensive metabolic panel, your CBC, your iron status, vitamin D, insulin, et cetera, because like Mary said, it's not just one system, it's how it all, works together. So that's why, like, just running, if your client hasn't had labs done, I'm going to say in more than even like 4 months, and you're just looking at sex hormones, it's not really telling us much. Like, it is, but it's not telling us the whys. It's kind of showing us the what. Maybe it explains some of the why, but I mean, anyway, it's so important to get that comprehensive like panel done to really see what is going on, to be able to create that map going forward.
Yeah, that's why I'll touch on like one thing that Sarah just said, that we see often, and this absolutely ties into specifically hypothyroidism, which is what we're focusing on today, is like lipids. You'll get I want to say like a really basic lab work done, when they're like, hey, I had my GP exam. We'll typically see maybe a TSH, but we'll see, CBC, CMP, and we'll see maybe a brief lipid panel. And this is where you can start to see things like, total cholesterol changing, LDL going up. And as much as we're not going to talk, specifically about a lipid panel today, we can actually see, changes in thyroid health, specifically hypothyroidism, showing up there with regards to our lipids and lipid metabolism.
Right.
And so that's when we're like, hey, we really want to take a big look under the hood. So for women in perimenopause specifically, there's a lot going on hormonally with regards to estrogen and progesterone. Typically, most likely, we're going to be seeing progesterone leaving the picture first. We're going to be seeing less and less ovulatory cycles as they get deeper into perimenopause, depending on, again, we go from early to late. But something that we can truly see, is with regards to that estrogen. And when we start to see changes in thyroid health, as Sarah mentioned, it affects every system. Most people think thyroid health or hypothyroidism means that I have the inability to lose weight, to which it can absolutely affect our metabolism and how we are utilizing energy. But as she mentioned, it affects our gut health and everything else. It affects our hormone health, specifically how we're metabolizing hormones. We talked recently, I believe it was on Instagram, about a bile. And so hypothyroidism, when we're talking about gut health specifically, it's going to be slowing down, as far as that bile that's being produced in the liver. And that's if you have a gallbladder, how that bile flow happens. Well, unfortunately for women in perimenopause, when estrogen is fluctuating but on the downward spiral, that also affects our bile, and it actually makes it really, really thick. And so this is where we can start seeing congestion with regards to liver. And if we're starting to see liver congestion or just liver stress, that's going to show up in our cholesterol. And everything else is also going to show up in how we're metabolizing those hormones. And so you might have heard of estrogen dominance. Now, I'm going to say air quotes on estrogen dominance, because that's a whole nother discussion. But if we have a slowdown in how our liver is processing our hormones, how we're having now sluggish, gunky bile, and maybe even less of it, then we're going to be affecting how we're metabolizing that estrogen. We're also going to be affecting ovulation. And so now, if we're affecting that ovulation, we're going to have even less progesterone. Our estrogen's going to be slower to excrete, and we're going to be recycling it into old, used up, second rate. I'm lying.
Yeah. Well, so now you're not talking about, like, if the whole reason you started focusing on your thyroid in the first place was because of the physique, because of fat loss, now it's not just your thyroid, impacting your metabolism, impacting your inability to lose body fat like you want. It's also your liver. It's also, that recirculating estrogen. It's your gut health. So it's this compounding, effect. And reeling it back, you said, late 30s to, let's say, early 50s is the age group, we're kind of talking about here, about, midlife, perimenopause. Supporting your thyroid, supporting your health as a whole needs to start before that. And that's why it matters, even if you aren't, in perimenopause, or if you are like in those very like early, stages, let's just say, late 30s, or early 40s, because we start supporting that thyroid now. We get that comprehensive panel done now. We see what's going on. We see, okay, things aren't quote unquote bad. Go back to our episode on lab work and emotions with that. Things aren't maybe bad, but maybe things could be a little bit more optimal. That's why we do want to start optimizing now, and we don't want to wait, because like Mare said, if we wait, okay, we know that decline to sex hormones is inevitable. And we want to support all the processes that are impacting your sex hormone production now, so that we do have robust ovulatory cycles. We do have as robust hormone production, sex hormone production as possible for as long as possible. So that's why supporting that thyroid and every other system is so important. And it's so easy to brush it off, to be like, oh, my hair's not falling out, or, things are good. And it's like, oh, well, maybe things could be better. And again, approaching that from a place of not neuroticism, but approaching that from a place of supporting my body holistically and keeping my longevity in mind, and really playing the long game here, which is hard. And again, this doesn't mean that we think about it day to day and our it takes up every, thought in our mind, but it does mean that we're prioritizing nutrient dense foods. We're doing all the things, to give our thyroid, that love it needs. And then we are looking at, other systems that might need support.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You mentioned earlier about, stress and cortisol. And I think that during this time too, specifically for perimenopause women, we've talked on and on, but this is where we do have to think about that female during this time in her life, whether it's raising children, having adult children, getting married and starting their own families, maybe perhaps now starting to take care of parents. So that parental relationship is now becoming, almost like a child relationship. And so, thriving careers, going back to school, all the things. And so
bratty teenagers. Yeah, I was just like thinking,
that, like,
sorry, mom.
Yeah. That, like, when we start to think about cortisol that way, like, it's that stress, as we mentioned earlier, it can affect that conversion, right, of those thyroid hormones. So that when Sarah was mentioning labs that we like to have run, and she was saying the T4 and T3, the reason that she said that we like to see a full picture is we like to see what the thyroid is producing, and then what is actually getting converted to that free and active form, and just keeping a pulse on that. And this is where, again, looking at that full picture, if somebody, for example, we're starting to see, cortisol levels that are just, our stress resilience is not top notch, well, that's one thing we can, again, do our best to work through, because that in itself will affect that conversion of those T4 to T3. And then, like Sarah mentioned, our nutrient status. So perhaps, like, we have to live our lives. We have a lot going on. And so maybe we need more nutrients during this time. And it's like we started the podcast by talking about dieting and dieting history and that being a stress. Well, this is a time where I think most women come to us and they have been under eating. Perhaps they haven't even been aware that they're dieting, and understanding that that in itself is going to affect their thyroid health. Now they have all this compounding stress and the stress of under eating it. So again, we may need to start feeding you more, giving you more nutrients. And one of Sarah's favorite things, like minerals, potassium.
You read my mind. You read my mind. Yes. And every nutrient almost, plays a role here, but magnesium, potassium, like, are definitely, two biggies. And that's, from like whole foods, and, learning to fuel yourself beyond macros and, protein, carbs, and fats. And, if you, especially like if you've been kind of quote unquote in the game for a while, you probably know, like, you probably have like your routines and stuff with, protein and your favorite carbs and stuff. but maybe it's a time to like look at more specifically what you're choosing. Like, okay, like maybe like it's just always chicken breast, but hey, like if we can rotate in some, ground beef because, we need that iron, and we need, maybe more whole eggs in your life. I know like eggs, I feel like they're starting to be a little cheaper right now if you're listening to this in 2025. But anyway, we need to look at again like more like root veggies and potatoes and stop using just convenient snacky stuff all the time. Again, not because that stuff is bad, but because we just are looking at like how to really bolster your system and kind of create some new habits and routines. And then again, thinking about, like you said, like your life right now, like, okay, like how can we meal prep in different ways? Like how can we like make different choices when we're on the road and whatnot? And, just add more tools to your tool belt. But yeah, the nutrient, I think is a great place to start. I would also go back to our podcast on sleep, because sleep and thyroid physiology, that's huge, as far as like a big contributor. What are some other things like that you start thinking about as far as like both supporting hormone production, thyroid hormone production, because those nutrients are important for that, and then thyroid hormone conversion, so converting that inactive T4 to the active T3.
Yeah.
What are I said nutrients, I said sleep.
Yeah, hydration. I was gonna say on the nutrients thing, one thing I just want to like stop and say is like some nutrients that you hear a lot about, but you don't really think about them as far as like thyroid health. I think that a lot of people hear about selenium, and maybe not. And if you're listening to this and you never heard about selenium, then selenium is awesome. Brazil nuts, scallops, oysters, if that's your thing, and maybe this is a reason to have a really hot date night, and go get some really awesome oysters. Make sure quality is there. I do not want food poisoning. Although, if you do get that, you can contact us and we can help. But things like zinc and vitamin D, that's actually something, and I'll make a correlation that Sarah said. Magnesium was like top on my list. Magnesium, because that is used for everything, but it's also used to help convert vitamin D. And we actually need a really good amount of vitamin D because it helps our thyroid hormones bind to the receptors. So this is where you can start seeing that like one thing affects the other thing, and that kind of all goes back to gut health. But the other thing that she was mentioning, like with eggs and choline, but even like omegas, so like there's like a pretty good amount of like what I call general health, like supplements, but also things that you can get in your day-to-day life, whether that's again like adding in fish, whether that's adding in like olive oil, macadamia nut oil, avocados, things like that, that just changing your diet and looking for more variety and more color, you actually can get a pretty solid amount of all of these nutrients that your thyroid needs and even
Yeah.
your sex hormones need.
Yeah, and you mentioned supplements. Like there are a lot of food like magnesium, like it is hard to get enough magnesium through your diet.
I'm
And
saying
I would
possible.
say it's impossible. And magnesium needs are actually way high. Like people don't realize like how much magnesium you really could take. Again, like everyone is a little bit different, but and we want to consider forms as well. We'll have an entire magnesium podcast, but you could do like a good amount of magnesium, depending on you, and like again, like beef liver supplements, like things like that are yes supplements, but they almost serve as like a food, in a sense, like a high quality fish oil, et cetera, et cetera. We could go on and on about just supplements and minerals, by themselves. But you mentioned gut health. I mean, okay, so great. Like we're eating all these nutrients. How's your gut health? Like, are we having like obvious GI symptoms, or are we like maybe having subtle GI symptoms? Maybe we need to, dive deeper into, your gut health, and maybe that means testing. Maybe it just means like supporting you with maybe some digestive bitters to help you break down your food and your nutrients and help you absorb them a little bit better. Maybe it means like doubling down on sleep, meal hygiene, habits, like chewing your food and whatnot. Again, these are things we'll dive into like so much more. But it absolutely all connects.
Yeah. I was going to say One other thing I'll just touch on and then we can, move on is when it comes to a female who's going through midlife and perhaps we're getting to, anywhere in that journey, whether it's early or late midlife, and you are doing all the right things. And this is something we've talked about a lot, but you're doing all the right things. You're eating, eating all the things, you're sleeping, your stress resilience, you're training, and you are seeing that your thyroid health is just not responding to all those things.
Yeah.
I see a lot of women feel a lot of guilt with regards to if they need a medication, something like a desiccated thyroid or some sort of T3, T4 supplementation. And I really want you to pause on that because we definitely do not believe that, taking medication erases the need for all of the things that we just went over that are incredibly beneficial for your day-to-day life. In fact, it's needed. Like otherwise the capacity of the reach of said medication is not going to be as expansive as it possibly could be, and you even could have a resistance to
Yeah.
it. But I also want the females out there to also not feel that you have done something inherently wrong or you are broken for needing thyroid support.
Not at all. And it's so funny you brought this up because that was where my brain was going next. And because this is a conversation that happens so often, again, with my clients, late 30s to, early 50s, whatever, especially, and some of them are already on thyroid medication. So maybe it's a conversation of, like you said, like maybe talking to providers about different forms that maybe would serve you a little bit better, as far as that thyroid medication goes. But then it's doubling down on the habits. And like you said, it's okay, like, if we're, 45 and have been, doing these things, like our body's been doing all these things for us for 45 years. And for better or worse, we're in this place where labs are looking like they're looking and we're having symptoms like we're having and we're doing all the things maybe for months and years and
Yeah.
things aren't budging or things aren't improving as robustly as maybe they could. We got these tools for a reason. Like
Right.
hella, like I know I started with throat chakras. Like
That's so true.
forgive me for starting with throat chakras, but we can support the throat chakra and we can have us some good old Western medicine and include things that are going to support you and use, those tools.
Not a failure for that stuff.
Oh, hell no. No, 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 no. And, there, that's an entire other podcast, but, and I think, yeah, women need to hear that, and that might be a step before hormone therapy
Yeah.
as far as talking about HRT and whatnot.
Yeah.
When we say hormone therapy, I think we kind of lump thyroid in there a little bit, but
It's true. It's true. And this is where, there's two things I think that we should talk about. But one, I'll just stay on this one and then we'll maybe move forward to maybe like just some actual things that can be symptomatic of hypothyroidism or thyroid issues, which is, I know it's a long list, so we'll just touch on maybe a couple and just disclaimer, it won't be inclusive. But this also very appropriate for the midlife female. Speaking of medications, is so for females that do start hormone therapy, that also will affect or can affect that thyroid, because going back to what I mentioned about thyroid and estrogen, estrogen. So if we start to see estrogen climbing or we're adding in some estrogen, we possibly could see an increase in that what's called a thyroid binding globulin, to which could take some tinkering with regards to if you are on a thyroid medication. And this is why, again, we are kind of firm about that you need to have lab work done in conjunction to just overall health, but also if you are exploring hormone therapy, to which if you are a midlife female, that is something that is well within your right. You do not need to wait until you are in, you do not need to wait till you don't have a period for exactly 13 months to all of a sudden be a candidate for hormone therapy. And that includes thyroid medication.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we even said though like the signs that thyroid, let's maybe kind of rattle off like maybe some common ones and then maybe some subtle ones.
Yeah, I'll do a couple brain ones real fast. I'll do some brain ones. So, and these are going to be polar opposite, but anxiety, depression, brain fog, sleep disturbances.
Oh,
That's what I
very
kind
good.
of think of as far as brain stuff that you could see, which if you listen to our other podcast, you're gonna be like, wait, like, can't that be other things? Yes, it can.
It can. It can. Yeah, I'm going like definitely thinking like hair, skin, nails, like dry skin can definitely, be a thing like eyebrows kind of looking thin, feeling cold a lot. That's a very common symptom. And then I would say PMS, that's huge. Like just
Yeah.
like you said, the anxiety stuff, but like heavy periods. And then this is why we are so big on like tracking your cycle because length of your luteal phase, being shorter, so like less than like 10 days could be indicative. If you track your basal body temperatures, a low morning basal body temperature. Why is that? Well, progesterone is that thermic hormone, but so is thyroid, and they both work together to give you that rise in basal body temperature in your luteal phase. And I'm stopping myself because we could have an entire podcast just on that. And
Yeah.
we have blogs on all this as well. So I'm not going to dive.
That's like such a great example though of like how those work so well together and
Yeah.
again why we want as many ovulatory cycles as possible and why when our thyroid or we're starting to have suboptimal thyroid or even clinically an optimal thyroid if we're having less ovulatory cycles because of our thyroid health and we're in perimenopause to which we're already going to have less
Right.
ovulatory it's like it can feel like quite a shit show.
Well, and okay, that makes me think of shit show, gut health, constipation. That's huge with hypothyroidism. So, and then we have, okay, constipation, did it start because of the thyroid or were you constipated and that's impacting your thyroid or the causes of the constipation? So, a lot of coaches will jump to like a GI map as an idea for a client with constipation, but it's like, okay, well, have you looked at their thyroid? Like, has that been checked on as far as that full comprehensive panel in the last 6 months?
Yeah.
Because if it hasn't, like, I would start with serum labs because one, that can tell you about gut health and it can tell you about every system. And maybe that's the place to start and not, a gut, focus.
Or even before that, going back to what we mentioned about nutrition, I always say that potassium's like your favorite, but it's just because you've spoken so much
I'm such
about
a
it.
twat about potassium. I feel like all my clients are like, shut up. Like,
Like going back to like the step before, you have client, so sorry, coming in who's in midlife, and we just made all these connections with regards to constipation, thyroid. I even mentioned again liver and bile, and if we're having constipation, then again we're not excreting. But going back to like their nutrition, what are those micronutrients looking like? Like how much food are they eating? And again, if they do have hypothyroidism, you may have it might be this kind of chicken versus egg thing where you do have to slowly increase food, but be more specific and mindful to those micronutrients because they might just not have the raw materials to help things go round as best as they could, understanding that in midlife, things are, I'm going to say, slowing down, right? So they are going a certain direction, but we also want to make sure that we're not running towards that direction. We want to optimize things as best as we can.
absolutely. Well, I honestly think that's a good place to kind of wrap it
Yeah.
because we could go on and on here. We love thyroid. We love talking about all the nuances and the intricacies of just how the body does work as a unit. And it's fascinating. It can be overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. And that's why we are so big on education, both for any of the women we work with and the coaches, that we work with, as well.
Yeah. And if you have not registered, we highly encourage you to join us for our webinar that's coming up. It is geared towards coaches, and we want to be very clear about that. But we also recognize and we encourage any female to register for it. We absolutely guarantee you will walk away with information that you, well, number one, will be directly applicable to you because you are a female, especially if you have not or you are in midlife. It will be applicable to you. You will be able to take that information and perhaps use it as communication with regards to your family physician. Or perhaps this is an opportunity if you have never worked with a coach. Perhaps you want to have a consultation and say, hey, like, where are my blind spots? Or what is the information that I need to have as a woman so that I can age well? Like, this is exactly why we're doing a webinar like this. So if you're not registered, we highly encourage you to do that. If you are registered and you're listening to this podcast, we also encourage you to forward the information. If you know a female, if you know any coaches in the space, any personal trainers that work with women, especially if they're giving nutritional advice, they need to know this information as well.
Absolutely. And if you want the background that none of us got in middle school or high school, we actually have another webinar on just understanding like menstrual cycle, like kind of 101. Again, like all the stuff that was kind of like, yeah, and that happens, like you bleed, and if you get pregnant, you'll die. Like that is the education we all got. We have that on our website as well. So a lot of tools to start taking action